All right, let's start it. Let's see. Let's look at the agenda, see where we are. All right, so we are right here, right? We're at the sixth week of the course, almost halfway there. And we had introduced AngularJS last week. We went over the concept of a single page application, of using a different way of thinking about the page generation of pages. We introduced AngularJS as a model view controller library, right? That was a higher level thinking of the pages, right? So it was jQuery was a low-level way of thinking about the page, right? It was a way of directly manipulating the DOM, right? Grabbing things from the DOM by either by CSS selectors, right? And then manually, building HTML but having a nice API that will allow us to very easily manipulate the attributes, right? The classes and the structure of the page. When we introduced Angular, it forces us to think about our web applications in terms of these three buckets, right? The model, the view, and the controller. And we saw that if there were any concerns, of how to render things, that was the task of the view, right? The view you had to give it some objects, right? Some JSON for it to render. And the controller did that. The controller was responsible for fetching this data, retrieving this data somehow, and making it available for the clear-cut set of concerns on who was responsible for what responsibilities, right? The controller's responsibility was data. It didn't have the responsibility of manipulating the DOM, as opposed to when we did the jQuery example, right? In jQuery, the JavaScript manipulated the DOM. Over here, the JavaScript is only fetching data and making it available to the view for then the view to render. Yes. So we're gonna continue this idea. We're gonna even though right here it shows that we're only doing 2 weeks of AngularJS, in reality we're gonna be doing AngularJS throughout the entire semester. We're just focusing in these 2 weeks, introducing all the basics of AngularJS, and as we progress, we'll introduce a new need whenever we, for us to be able to talk to the database, to talk to the server, to talk security issues. We'll revisit more concepts of AngularJS. So we're here. So we're going to be talking today. The main, although we haven't covered directives, so we'll do that as well this week. Okay. Just a note on directives. We did mention, I believe I mentioned last week that high level, that creates so many layers of abstraction of the DOM, doesn't play nice with jQuery, right? jQuery wants to directly manipulate, by hand, right, the DOM, and AngularJS is way up here, having an object representation of this page, right? And so these two go against. So there's an appropriate way of having them work together, and which we'll talk about today when we get to directives. But directives is the appropriate way of having these two techniques work together instead of against each other. Right? So don't just go off and have Angular pages and then just use jQuery to start manipulating things in the DOM. Okay, AngularJS will not be happy, right? And you'll start getting some inconsistent results, right? So yeah, directives. When we'll get to directives. All right. So let me introduce routing and what's the theory and what's the idea behind it. So I'll use the Blackboard to talk about this. So let me stop sharing screen. Routing, the main topic of today is based on several concerns that appear when you're working with fairly large applications. And you just have a couple of pages that depend on each other. You might have links, right? One going from page A to page B, and the way you implement that typically is through using hyperlinks, and you hard code the HTML document that where you're going to want to go from right? The destination. It's hard coded in the hyperlink, right? And that's fine, right? It's not a problem. But if you have dozens, hundreds of pages, it starts to become a problem, right? Imagine that each page had lots and lots of links going to all different places, right? And if this is repeated across many different pages, the logic of navigation, right? What the control of who goes where is encoded in each one of these pages, right? If you ever have to rearrange the flow because you need to add additional pages in between or afterwards, or you just want to change the flow because it's a new business, right? New business requirement. Inserting things here means that you have to go to the origin page, right, and manipulate them, right? If before getting to B you need to insert a page in between, you have to go back and modify, right, a whole different pages. The logic of navigation is basically spread over lots of different artifacts, right? You have to go and maintain all these pages. It becomes fairly complex, right? And it's a challenge. So we were looking for ways to solve this problem, and instead of having this spaghetti code, it's almost like a go-to, right? You're hard coding this go-to. If you click here, you go there, right? And then you don't know who depends on who unless you go and see what the line says. So an alternative solution to this was to instead declare a central cop, right, or a central dispatcher who would be responsible for encapsulating, modularizing, right, the logic of flow, right? So instead of pages knowing about their destinations, right, instead they would have like a virtual destination, right? Or there would be the intent of the user would be encoded. It says, hey, the user wants to go home. They want to go to the profile. They want to go here, there. Instead of actually going there, right? Each page would notify this central controller, right? This central cop here, this dispatcher, this traffic cop in the middle, and say, hey, the intent of the user is to do this. Okay, I have no idea where that is, right? You figure it out, right? And so everybody notifies the controller of the intent of the user, right? And then the controller can have, maybe a configuration file where maybe it's a CSV file or a spreadsheet or some JSON object, right? That says if you're here, this is where you should go, right? And you can even have a graphical representation of this, right? Maybe you have this nice UI that allows you to drag and drop arrows from origins to destinations, right? If you click on this button, you go here. If you click on that button, you go there, right? And generate this JSON file that can then be loaded by the controller, and then this configures the flow of the application. Make sense? It's a much better solution. You have one single maintenance artifact, right, as opposed to having lots of maintenance artifacts spread all over the place. Make sense? So that's one of the design goals, right, of what we're going to see today, right, of Angular routing mechanism. Okay. The other aspect that drives what we're going to see today is the fact that we want to reuse a lot of the common artifacts, right? If you remember, a lot of the pages had this, maybe the same sidebar, and the only thing that changed over the various pages was the main content, right? So what we want to be able to do is to refactor this so that we artifact, right, as a header, maybe this is a sidebar, and maybe this is a footer, and then load them, right, load them dynamically, and then load it here. And the only thing that changes between page and page is the main content, right? What we want to be able to do is to dynamically load here one of several pieces of content. Maybe we want to load the home or the profile, or we want the admin or the forms or whatever, right? We have to dynamically load this and update this, right? But everything else stays the same. It's not loaded again and again and again, right? They become single points of maintenance again, right? As opposed to maintaining this across, 5, 6, 7, hundreds of pages once, right? And then you have only single maintenance artifact. So the routing mechanism allows us to do this. Right? Allows us to dynamically load these snippets of code, right, and update this empty and when we look at the routing mechanism, it declares this as an empty placeholder, right, that it calls ngview, right? And depending on as we click, right, as we navigation links, they are dynamically loaded into the view. Okay, right? All right. So we need to do that, right? An additional concept that this routing mechanism borrows on is something that has been with us for quite a while. If you have a very long document, right, you can split up this document into various subsections, right? You can have several subsections, and then identify them logically using anchors, right? You can say that if there's an anchor, right, and the ID or the name is that this is the references section, right? And close. It's not a real anchor that you click and navigates, right? It's just that you are marking this location of the document by this reference, by this ID or name, and then you can have several of these, right? Right, and this is my my methodology, right? Maybe it's a research paper, and so on and so forth, and hyperlinks, right? That whose href is not a separate document, but references to the subsections in your very long page, right? Wikipedia does this, right? Content, and it jumps down, right? And then you can click up again, and then you can jump way down there at the bottom of the page, and then click up again, right? They use this technique, and then so to be able to accomplish this, they use the hash, right? The hash, right? The various locations, right, in the same document, right? So this would be hash ref, right? This means the hash means it's in this document, right? I am referring to an anchor in this document, right? And the browsers are designed to listen for changes in the URL, right? That include this hash. So if this page would be .html, right? And this lives in whatever, and yada 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 yada, right? If you click on these, right, and this forms.html, it would add a hash after the URL at the end of the URL. Okay. The hash after this, you get ref or whatever, right? As you click through this. What this does is that it doesn't navigate away from the page. It stays in the same page, but it scrolls. It scrolls the page down to ref or this. Right? And the mechanism is supported by all browsers. Right? The way the browsers support this is that they look at the URL. They look at the URL, and it says, okay, this is the document that I need to load, right? Physically load that document, and then I need to scroll down to that section declared in the same page. Yes, right? So what AngularJS and many of these MVC libraries do is they hijack this behavior. They take advantage of this existing mechanism, right, of working with hashes, and it says, I can work with this, right? Browsers parse this out and have listeners that listen for changes in this section of the URL, this last section of the URL. If it changes because you clicked on different parts of the table of contents, right? You're changing the hash. You're always changing this hash portion. The browser responds, right, by navigating to that section. What JavaScript does is it says that, I'm going to take over this mechanism, and through JavaScript you can tell the browser, say, hey, hash section has changed. Okay, and the browser says, okay, fine. If that hash changes, I'll notify you. Okay, and so what Angular does is that it listens to these hash. It says, and this hash might be, hash home, hash forms, hash profile, hash admin, hash whatever, right? And Angular says, as this hash changes, what I'll do is go fetch the HTML that I should put in, right, in here, right? So if this link that says hash home, and this link says hash profile, yes, right? If I click on hash profile, my URL, right, my page will be, the index page, right? And as I click through this, whatever, right? If I click on profile, it'll be profile, right? So what Angular does is that it can listen to that, right? It can listen to those changes, right? Anything after the hash, and you can configure that if it's profile, if after the hash you have profile, you can configure this to load profile.html. See that? And it loads the profile here in the ng view. If instead after this it says admin, right, and you can map it. If it's admin, it'll load admin.html. Okay, and this configuration is that centralized controller I mentioned earlier, right? The centralized controller. You can map these things and say what to show, right, where to navigate to, right, if the hash becomes this, that, or the other. Make sense? All right. So Angular uses these techniques to provide a mechanism to navigate, right? To navigate between different portions. All right. Okay. So let's go through some of the examples code that I have here. That'll probably take us, an hour or so, and then in the second half, to a demo, right? And we can build something from scratch. Okay. Any questions? All right. All right. So let's. Okay. So let's look at AngularJS. So, please, over here, please. So some of the examples that are listed here, some of them we already looked at last week. So I'm going to skip over some of these. Okay. A hello world AngularJS application. I'm not gonna do that, right? ng-click, we did ng-click. ng-model, we did ng-model. So I'm not gonna go over that. Let's look at ng-route. Okay. So ng-route, this is a simple of routing examples, the simplest that I could think of. And I'm actually going to run it locally. Let me change it. Go in a portal. And let's see, do I have the database running? If I have the server running, I mean the database. Okay, looks like I do. There we go. So let's look at the local version of this. It's ng-route. Okay, it's the same. It's the same. This is the same I had online, but now it's running on, locally on my machine, so we can look at the source code. So here it's a very simple example here, and if you can read down here, you'll notice that the first one is referencing, notice index.html /home. See that? Right. If I hover over profile, right, it says /profile. See that? No, this won't zoom. The whole page zooms, not the stuff here. #profile. Believe me, it says #profile, /profile. And this one index, actually the source code. Okay, we can look at the source code, and we have the hyperlinks right here, right? You know, #home, #profile, and #admin. Okay, and notice that we have this placeholder. Right? And this place implements this home lorem ipsum. Okay, and so this content here is dynamically being loaded, right, from an HTML snippet of code, right? So that if I click on profile, admin, these three, the three here, even though you only see H2 change, actually the whole paragraph is changing, right? So just to make sure that it is indeed changing, I can show you the source code here. The example lives ng-route. So examples AngularJS ng-route. It's this one. It's these over here. Home. Right. They all have the same lorem ipsum. Right. But to make it more compelling, let's change the actual text. Let me copy some other text. So for profile, let me change that to that, and for home admin, I'll change it to something else. So if I go back, refresh. Here we go. So we click on home, you get this one content admin. So it changes. See that? So the header is changing and the content is changing, right? So it's being loaded. So the way this works is that this placeholder here, right, is basically the ng view. Is this ng view? Is this div that is empty? It has nothing in it. Okay, to implement this, what we did is that we're loading the Angular.js or AngularJS we were using last week, and to implement this navigation mechanism of showing different content as you click, right? We use this Angular route.js. Okay, and so this ng view is a directive, this ngView-view, it's a new attribute that is declared by the Angular-route extension library. Okay. To implement this, we can see at app.js. So app.js is very much similar to what we've seen so far, right? We have the IFI, we have Angular declaring a single module, whiteboard, that's the name of our application, right? Which is declared right here, right? There is ng app whiteboard app, yes. And then here we have the declaration saying that our main application depends on this other module, right? The ng-route module. That's the name of the module that is declared when we load the route.js library. It declares a single module. Inside of that module, we have the declaration of ngView and a whole bunch of other things that we'll be using to use this framework. Okay, and here's the configuration. The configuration allows us to do the mapping of saying, if you see this in the URL, then this is where you should go, right? This is what's listening to the anything that's after the hash, right? Anything that's after the hash, and it maps it to what should be loaded, something or the other, right? To do this, we use a brand new service, right? Just like $scope, $HTTP. Did we see $HTTP last week? I forget. We didn't, right? Okay, we'll see it today. So these are all frame services and providers that are declared by the framework. Okay, anything that starts with $ is provided by the framework. Okay, this one is a new one, right? That is provided by the ng-route module, right? And what it does, it's an object that is used to be able to configure the routes, right? What gets, what hash gets mapped to what HTML. Okay, so what we're doing here, the API is such that we say, when you see this URL pattern, this is all after the hash. This is all after the hash, right? Remember, this is a single page application, right? SPA, and we are loading the page only once. So the index page is loaded only once, right? So which is this one, right? This gets loaded only once. And notice that as I click here, new content is being shown, but notice that the page never reloads. You see that? The page never reloads. You don't see it. It doesn't go out to the server well, actually it does go to the server, but it does that internally. It uses Ajax, right? It uses Ajax. It says, oh, so slash profile. Okay, well, what should I? If it hasn't loaded it already, it'll generate an Ajax call, right, underneath, like we did a couple weeks ago using jQuery Ajax, right? It'll ask for this file, right? It'll parse the ASCII that comes back to the text, right? And it will append this new content to the ngView div, right? It'll be a new DOM element, all the DOM elements added to the ngView. If when I click on /admin, if it sees it empties out the old ngView, the DOM, right? And it fetches the admin.html, right? It parses it out, right? And it creates a new DOM for that new page, right? And it appends it into the ngView. Make sense? Right? Giving us the feature of navigating from one content to the other content to another content. Yes? Here, most of the content is static, right? The navigation at the top, and then the explanation at the bottom, right? The only dynamic portion that is changing, is this portion, the paragraph and the label, right? And these pages, are, you can view the content of these pages. You can see the home.html, right? It's just headers and paragraph. You can look at profile. These are the snippets of code that are being fetched, right, and included in the ngView div. Everybody okay? Notice that these are snippets of HTML. These are not full-blown HTML documents, right? They don't have HTML. They don't have head. Right? They don't have body. It doesn't have any of that, right? They're meant to exist inside of something else, right? They're meant to be partials, right? Not complete. Make sense? Right? And the assignment asks you to do something similar, right? The assignment asks you to rip forms and all these pages, rip out the headers and rip out the sidebars, rip out everything that is common to all pages. Only keep the main content in each one of these. We don't call them pages anymore because it's not a real page, right? Right. It's a partial page, right? We call them templates, right? Or a view, right? Okay. Let's see. Anything else? Right. So this is the controller. URL patterns. Right now, the URL patterns are static, right? It just says /profile, but they could have, regular expressions, right? They could have stars and patterns, right? That can generalize what this path looks like. Right now, it's just a simple static piece of text. Right? But as we'll see, it can get more complicated. And finally, otherwise says that if it doesn't match any of the ones above, then assume it's this one. This is the default page that you would go to, the slash, but which gets mapped to the options above. Right, this has to be one of the ones above. Right, so if you don't type if it's none of those, then it just loads home.html. Okay. All right. Let's go on to the next example. Location. So the Angular routing mechanism deals with everything that has to do with the URL, right? Anything that has to do after the hash sign, right? And then how to map to things and what to do when the hash does whatever it does, right? One of the things that we can ask the ng route module is, what is the current path, right? After the hash sign, right? And then we can code a whole bunch of logic based on what that URL is. For instance, what we could do is that as we navigate, we could highlight, right, different show and do different things dynamically. In this case, what we're doing is that we are dynamically displaying a different class for each one of these buttons at the top. Okay, the way we implemented that in the previous slide was that these buttons, these hyperlinks, were styled in each one of the pages, right? So page home, right, styled the home link as active, and page profile.html had exactly the same list of links, but it styled the profile link as active. Yes, right? But what we're trying to do is rip out everything that is common, right? So none of these pages are going to have the sidebar anymore, right? None of these pages are going to have the header at the top. Snippet of code, right? So since they live outside of the main content, how do they know where they are? Right, because it's just one snippet of code, right? That gets loaded only once. But still, I want to highlight links based on something, right? And so what we're going to do is that we're going to ask the framework, hey, give me this. See that? And then I can write logic around that will highlight my hyperlinks based on what that, right? So let's look at the source code. Let's see how do we do this. So again, we load the bootstrap and the routing, right? And over here we have the hyperlinks. This is the same exact hyperlinks we had earlier. Same exact hyperlinks, right? What the difference is that we have added an additional ng class attribute here, right, to each one of these. Okay, so the ng class attribute, right? That's this directive is part of the core of Angular, right? In Angular, you can calculate what class to apply, right, based on some logic, right? You can say, oh, I want to apply this class or that other class based on some logic. So the logic here is saying you can provide the logic as a JSON object, or you can provide it also as a variable. It can be a variable in the scope, right? So whatever the scope says, the name of the class is, that's the class I'm going to apply to this button, right, or to this element. So I can dynamically generate this string, right, in the controller. The controller can generate what that class is, right? Here, what we're doing is that notice that we have the hyperlinks. We have the hyperlink inside of a controller. Yes? In that control, the only thing that controller is that it provides the view with this variable in the scope. That's all the controller does, right? So if I click on it, notice that here we're rendering it. Notice we're rendering location. We're calling the URL function on it, okay? And as I click, notice that this variable here, that's the rendering, right? It's either the slash, the root, the slash profile, or slash admin, which is here after the hash. See that? Right, so we can retrieve that portion after the hash, right? And we'll just see in a minute how the controller gives us that. But now that we have this URL and we can retrieve what the URL is after the hash, we can write code. Right? We can write code to say that the class that I want to use for this element A is that I want to use the class BTN primary. BTN primary. If the following is true, if the URL is equal to slash, right? So it will apply BTN primary to this hyperlink if the URL is slash. If the URL instead is slash profile, I will apply this class to this element. It will be false, yes? So it will not apply the class to this hyperlink, right? It will only apply the BTN class, right? So we're hard-coding the BTN class for all hyperlinks, but only one of them is going to have the additional BTN primary, right? If this is true. Right? And the URL can only be one of these, right? It can't be all three. Okay? So that's how we are programmatically choosing to highlight one or the other, right? This navigation here, these hyperlinks don't live in the main content anymore, right? So they don't know in what page they're in, right? So we have to identify other ways by which we can highlight things. Make sense? Right? And this also points to a technique of importance in general for single-page application. Well, for any application in general, right? That is that the state of the application, should always be encoded in the URL. Right? The URL should give me enough information, right, to or render the application based on that URL. So the URL should give me some means, right, that the state is encoded in the URL. Right? Somehow it's encoded in there. Right now, our encoding is something trivial. Right? It's the encoding of just the location. Where are we? Okay, that's all. Right? But this URL could be, fairly sophisticated, right? It could be, it could be slash user ID slash course ID slash section ID. Yes, so it could be a fairly complex URL from which I can derive these parameters in the URL and then render for you that particular section for that particular course for that particular student. You see that? So there's a fairly common technique in web pages in general, but specifically here in single page applications, right? The intent is that I always have the URL, uniquely identify what my current state is, right? Given the URL, I should be able to take this URL, send it to someone, right? And if they click on that URL, they would see exactly what I see, right? imagine that. I mean, that's how you would expect Amazon works, right? You're looking at a product, right? And you want to share that product with someone. I mean, your expectation, right, is that you should be able to copy that URL, paste it in the email, and send it to someone, right? And then someone clicks on that URL, and they see that you were looking at, right? And you'll notice that that URL is fairly cryptic, right? It's fairly cryptic, right? They have their own way of encoding, right, what exactly you're looking at in the page, and those pages are fairly dynamic. Yes, it's loading the main content of that product, description, reviews, right? They're trying to sell you other things. How is this related to other products, what other people have bought? So it's a fairly dynamic page, right? Right. The state of what you're looking at is encoded in that URL, so that if I send it to someone, you can be fairly guaranteed that they will see exactly what I'm looking at. Make sense? Right. So this is something that you should always consider when you are web applications, right? Encode the state in the URL. What else? So let's look at this control, the nav controller. The nav controller is, I believe it's implemented in the app.js. So let's open up app.js. So it's fairly earlier, right? We have the config, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mention this, right? To configure the application, we use this .config function of the Angular framework, right? And the way it works is that you provide it with a function that it will call, right? That will configure your app. It gives you a chance for you to configure the application in general, right? And in that function, you can ask for, several providers, right, that allow you to configure different aspects of the application. In this case, we are configuring the routing mechanism, right? It gets called before anything gets rendered in the page, right? This, it configures everything, and then everything starts to render after this. Okay, and we use it to configure the routing mechanisms. Okay. Anyway, after the declaration of the module, after the configuration, we are declaring this new controller. This new controller, you see that, right? And the only task of this controller is to make this location service available to the view. That's all it does, right? It says, hey, controller, I want the scope, right? Which we looked at last week, the scope, right? It represents the HTML portion, the template that this controller is responsible for. It's that nav, right? It's this nav right here. Notice that the nav starts here, it ends right there. So the controller is only responsible for these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code of HTML. It has no idea what's happening. It's only interested in this snippet. Okay. So what we're doing in the scope here, we're asking the framework also to pass us the location service. And the location service, as I mentioned earlier, it gives us an API to manipulate the URL, to query the URL, to retrieve query parameters, path parameters. It allows us to interact with the URL, right, with our current location. Yes? Right? Variable to the view through the scope variable. See that? We're saying scope, and then we create this variable. It doesn't have to be called $location in the view, right? But I use exactly the same name so that I know, right? I remember, oh, it's mapped to this service on the controller, right? I use the same exact name. I believe the assignment asks you to do something similar, right? It asks you to tie the location to the view so that in the view you can highlight, right, different things in the sidebar, in the top level, links at the top, right? Okay. All right. Right. Other than that, it's exactly the same thing as we had earlier, right? It's loading profile, admin, and whatnot. Okay. All right. So let's move on. Actually, one more thing I wanted to point out. Notice here that the controller is asking for $ scope and $ location. See that? If I change the order in which those two variables are declared as parameters, right, this still would work. Okay, and that is somewhat disconcerting, coming from a functional programming background or even an object-oriented background. It says, what do you mean? The order of the parameters doesn't matter? Okay, it doesn't. Right? And it's using a design pattern that is very common in server-side developments, which is injection, right? Dependency injection, right? In Java or C# or these other server-side programming languages, you can declare a variable, and then you auto-wire this, because I'm declaring this function, and I'm giving the type of the variable, right? And it says just auto-wire it, right? And you're telling the framework, says find me an instance of this class, right? Instantiate it, and then just make it available to me in this variable I've just declared. And just like that, magic, right? Just by mentioning this variable, right, and saying that I want you to be auto-wired, it gets injected in you. Instead of you having to create the code that creates the instantiation and then assigns it to a variable and explicitly do this, right? You rely on new paradigms, right, that allow you to code in this way, right? We usually refer to as like aspect-oriented programming, right, where you can use these annotations, right, and then all the dependencies are resolved for you, right, as opposed to you having to resolve them. So same thing here, right? AngularJS copied this this idea, right? And uses injection, right, dependency injection, the same way, right? What happens is that this function gets parsed by the framework, right, and it looks at this very special name. That's a very well-known name. It's resolved. The dependency gets resolved by name. Okay? It says, okay, you're asking for $ scope. Okay, fine. It looks at your function call, right? It looks at, okay, you're asking for $ scope and you're asking for $ location. All right, fine. I will call your function with these arguments, right? So that you change the order. It still works because it will be parsed by the framework and it'll pass it to me in the right order. Make sense? Right? There's one basic flaw in this technique, right? In JavaScript in particular, in JavaScript, oftentimes when we deploy this code in production, right? Typically all our code goes through a minification process, right? And part of the process is that all variables the names of the variables are collapsed, right? They're made into very small characters, right? A, B, C, D, okay? So these variables, like $ scope, $ location, they are converted into A, B, C, D, E, F. Now the framework doesn't work because the framework assumes that your variable is called in a particular way, right? We'll talk about that a little later. How to survive minification, right? How to survive minification. We still want to minify, right? But we need to address the issue of what happens to our variables and functions when they're minified. We'll revisit that a little later. All right, is everybody okay? Everybody still with me? Okay, great. All right, let's go on to the next one. Route controllers. Okay, so same thing as earlier. The only added difference here is that, So this is a hard-coded H2, right? In each one of home, profile, and admin. So that's the same we had earlier, right? But you'll notice that each one is changing this message hello from, right? One says hello from home controller, profile controller, and admin controller. These are not hard-coded like this is hard-coded. Okay, these are coming from controllers that are implemented for each one of the views. So now the home view will have a dedicated home controller, right? And the admin view will have an admin controller, and the profile view will have a profile controller, right? Because what we want to do here is that each one of these pages, right, will be mostly, well, most of them, probably some of them will be just static, right? And they won't need a control. But there'll be a fair amount of pages that we'll need to interact with them, right? People will be clicking them and dragging and providing data, right? And submitting data. Also, we'll need to provide that page with data, right? For it to render the data. And we do this typically from a controller. The controller is responsible for interacting and receiving the stream of gestures and event handlers, right? And then providing the appropriate data to the page. So in this example, we have the profile view receiving data from a controller that we're using to render this, right? So let's look at the implementation. Okay, so we have the same app.js, right? Notice that what it's doing here is that ripped out the configuration from here. You see that? Right? It's no longer in the app.js. Instead, typically we will have a configuration file that might be fairly complex, right? Might be fairly long, right? You might have several pages for one feature, several other pages from another feature, right? Several pages for checkout, for shopping cart, for wish lists and reviews and whatnot. So it could be fairly long, your configuration, right? So it warrants that it lives in its own file. Okay, you might even have several files, right? Configuration files. Perhaps for a large section of your application, you have a configuration file, and for another large section, maybe one for the admin pages, right? That is a fairly set number of pages that the admin is interacting with, and another one for the end user set of pages, right? So here we have a separate config file that reads the module, right? The whiteboard app module that is declared in app.js. Here is a read operation. Retrieve that module, right? Retrieve the module that was declared in app.js, and now I want to configure it. Okay, I want to configure it. Make sense? So in app.js, we declare it. There it is, the declaration, and we establish the dependency, right? So this is it's a write operation, right? Whereas this one is a read operation, is retrieving the module, it's retrieving the top level module, and now it's configuring it by providing the routes. So you'll notice that they all have the same routes that we had earlier, with the change that the HTML is now accompanied by a dedicated controller. So the home now has a controller, the pro controller, and the admin has an admin controller. You see that? So we have doubled the complexity of our application, right? We used to have just 3 artifacts. Now we have 6. Yes? Right? And whenever this application grows in complexity, we need to start organizing ourselves, right? And structure so that we can focus. We have to divide and conquer, right? So that we can focus on one particular thing, work on that without having to deal with the complexity of everything, having to think about everything at the same time. So to do that, we create directories, right? Where we're going to put everything that has to do with home, right? So we put the HTML in there, and we'll also put the controller under there. And we'll store it in there. Also, we'll put the JavaScript controller that goes in there, right? Again, we're creating some structure here, right? And we're gonna start following a naming convention. Okay, and we're going to, in the name of the artifact, right, of the file, we'll add its role. What is your role? What is the role of this file? Okay. What is it? What is the home? It's a view, right? It's meant to be viewed by the user, right? It's meant to be rendered by the user. A similar naming convention. It'll be home.controller.js. Okay. So for the profile, we'll profile view.html, and for the profile control, we have profile.control.js. Same for the admin. Okay. And what this says is that whenever you load this view, this is the controller that is responsible for that view. And whenever you load that a template, this is the controller responsible for that template, and so on and so forth, right? So no longer are we going to, in the HTML, say, ng-controller and then provide the name of a controller, right? We're not going to do that anymore, right? Well, at least views are dynamically loaded, right, by the router, right? You can still have a navigation controller, right, outside, right, in the index page, right, and say, okay, this snippet of code is controlled by that controller using ng controller. You can still use that, okay, right? And we should not forget that these controllers need to be loaded, right, in the index page. See that? Don't forget that, right? Otherwise, you'll get things such as no such controller found or whatever, right? So each one of these controllers, they're declared under that particular directory. And under there, you have the controllers home.controller, profile controller, admin controller. If you go in there, the controllers are fairly trivial. The only thing that they do is they retrieve the module, whiteboard, and they declare the controller by name. Right? And then the implementation of that controller. And the only thing that it's doing is that they're sending to the view in a placeholder. They're sending home hello or profile hello or admin hello, right? And that's where it's dynamically. You see the hello from admin controller, and that's how this portion is being dynamically generated. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? Yes.
I have a question, like the routing mechanism when it does an AJAX call, right? It requests for some file to load in the NG view, right?
Yes.
So how does that this URL transform into? Like we just have a / profile. So, but if we are in a view in the profile folder and we click on the home button, so how does that request look like?
Yeah. So let's Okay, so notice what happened, right? See the request that went out, right? Where I click on home, there's another request that goes out, right? So this is this URL is the URL you would have written that you would have used, right? So it's exactly the same URL you would have used to look at that HTML, right? You can actually grab that and copy it, right? You copy that and paste it here. Right, it's the snippet of HTML. Notice the template there, right? Admin hello, right? With the curly brackets, right? And this is a snippet of code. We look at the source, right? Notice it's just it's a snippet of code with the H3 with the placeholders, right? And they're loaded dynamically. On demand, and they are instantiated and added to the ng view div. Okay, does this answer your question?
I was just wondering, like, how does this the routing mechanism know that the admin.html occurs in the admin folder? Does it have to do?
Oh yeah, no, we declared it, right? We declared it right here, no? In the config, right? Right, in the config, the home view, right? And it's relative to where the config is, right? So the config says, okay, from me, I'm expecting that there's a home folder, and in there should be a home view, right? So these are physical files. This is a logical file, right? Some JS file, declare the controller by name, right? So this is not a physical file, right? It's referencing some other JavaScript file, declare the controller by name and named it home controller. Make sense? But here we have to, give it a physical file, right, of what to load for that and the abstraction happens here, right? This is abstracted by this slash, right? And this is abstracted by this slash profile, right? This is the intent of the user, right? It's a high-level intent of the user, which we then map to something physical, right? Make sense? Everybody okay? Yes.
So, isn't it easier to specify ng profile, ng controller inside the HTML file?
Right. So that dependency is the same thing as you want to have a single place of maintenance, right? Of saying what views get controlled by different controllers. You can have many controllers, right, in one single view, right? And that participate together to handle different event handlers and different scopes and different whatnot, right?
So
you would declare them here as well.
So if we have a route provider, then we should specify.
Yes, here's where we would specify all those things. And there's also sort of things that can be configured in addition, right? They'll be here which we haven't seen, right? About how the scope is handled, right? Whether there are interceptors, meaning before you get to the page, I want to make sure you're logged in, for instance, right? That you can intercept to the request, right? You can chain these things together. All those kinds of mechanisms, right, are participate in this configuration. It would be one single place where you can configure those things. And the templates, you could inject other controllers. As opposed, if you hard code it in the templates, right, it cannot be configured anymore, right? But this allows you to do testing, right, and inject a controller just for testing the HTML, whether it's good or not, right? You can inject data and you can do all sorts of things, right? Which if you hard code it, you can no longer do that. So you want to leave the views as dumb as possible, right? It says I'm just going to give you the data. You don't need to know where that comes from, right? Your responsibility is only to render it, right? Okay, entry repeat. I believe we did that already, right? Last courses one. What's courses one? Let me see what's that. Okay, so I believe. Okay, so this was showing just that you can navigate between two different sections. Notice that I did not use the active here to highlight the tab, but it is indeed modifying the hash and going from one place to the other. And the intent was that what we wanted to do is to see that we could use. I mean, this is what we did last week, right? We can remove, we can select and modify things, right? Or add new ones when we did that last week, right? But what we wanted to be able to do is to show you that we could have two pages depend on each other, right? Well, not pages, right? Two views depend on each other, where one of them has perhaps a list of of summaries of pieces of data, right? Maybe a search result, right? Or an editor where you're adding forms, lots of forms, right? And then you want to be able to go to the details of that forms where you have all sorts of fields for that particular form, right? A one-to-many relationship, right? So to implement that, we need to have these two views depend on each other, right? And communicate with one another. So for instance, here, if I click on this edit button, perhaps I would navigate to a course editor page, right? So if I click on edit, you'll notice that at the bottom we see that it's navigating to a view called course, and then adding at the end some identifier, right? Perhaps an ID, right, or some index, right? So if I use that, it navigates to some other course overview, right? and notice that the /0 at the top. You see that? Right? If I click on this one, it navigates to the same place, course overview. Right? If I click on this one, also navigates to the course overview. Yes? Right? So this is to point out the fact that now the URL has a pattern, right? What's the pattern? The pattern is that it has a hard-coded /course / something that can change, right? Like a placeholder or some parameter, right? But they all navigate to the same place, right? So to achieve that, let's look at the page source. You'll notice that to achieve that, in the config file, we can declare a URL pattern that has a hard-coded course, yes, followed by some placeholder. See that? You see the colon there? That colon, anything could go there, right? And whatever you put in there will be bound to this variable called index. That will be made available to you, right, in some parameter object, right, in some map. And you can retrieve by name, index, if you called it index, whatever you called it, right? So I'm saying I'm declaring a variable, and whatever's after that /, I want to bind it to this variable index, and then give it to me. You know, if I ask you what the index is, and then once I have this index, what I'd like to be able to do is retrieve the particular element that is referenced by this particular index. Make sense? Right? But notice that the implementation is not doing anything with the index, right? It always says just hello. It doesn't do anything. Pretty boring. But let's look at how it's implemented and see why it's not doing anything with it. Okay? Well, the 2 pages are the list of the courses, and then the other one is the overview of a particular course. So the intent is that presumably I have a list of courses which I render, right, in a tabular format, in this case, in a table. And then when you click course, so I can edit some more. Yes? That's the intent. But it's not doing that, right? So let's look at the list controller. So list controller, it's basically declaring a whole bunch of course, removing the course, editing the course. We did that on last Wednesday, right? We did it with movies, right? We added movies, updated movies, right? So I'm not going to go over that, right? It's basically the same thing, right? But in this case, we have an array of courses, right? Last week, I think it was an array of movies, right? In this case, it's an array of courses. And then the courses are made available to the UI for rendering. Yes? Right? But notice where this array lives. Where is it? It lives in the controller, right? It lives in the controller, right? So the other view, which is the course overview, right? It's that other page, has this course controller. The course overview controller has no access to that array, right? It lives in that other controller, right? So we need to look for a mechanism where controllers can share data, right? Where you can, one way that we could do it is, well, just make it global, right? So that now all controllers can see it, right? That would be a bad decision, right? Of making it global. Instead, what we're going to do is all access to data to the data, all manipulation to the data, right? We're going to wrap it around a nice API, right? That its only goal is to implement the CRUD operations of the data. The controller is no longer going to be responsible for the CRUD operations like we did last week, right? Last week, the controller implemented the CRUD operations like we have here, right? Here we have this controller, the courseless controller, implementing the CRUD operations that manipulates the data, right? We're going to remove this goal, right? This from the controller. Instead, right, put it in a nice modular implementation, which is going to be a course service. So let's look at that. I believe it's implemented here. Maybe not. Is it? No, I don't think it's there. Route 1, is it here? Wait a minute. Route 2, is it? Yeah, it's this one. So here's an example of users, and we have an array of users. In this case, we don't have the CRUD operations, right? We have an array of users, which is Ren, Bob, and Charlie, right? And this controller needs this list of users, right? So up to this point, the way we've implemented it is the array lives in the controller, right? But we saw that there's a problem there, right? What if another page wants to have access to this data, right? It can't live in the controller. Like for instance, here, if I click on Alex, it's going to navigate to the profile, but the profile is not going to highlight. I'm sorry, it doesn't highlight. If I click on Alex, it displays the details of Alex, the username Alex, and displays the information here, right? If I go back to users and I click on Charlie, it displays Charlie, right? Or if I click on Bob, it goes on and displays Bob. These are two different views, right? But they both have access to the same piece of data, right? One of them retrieves the entire list of users and displays the entire list of users, right? Whereas the other one displays a particular user, right? But they both have access to the same data. So how do we do this? How do we have two controllers access a shared piece of data? So how do we do this? Let's look at the page source. So to accomplish this, we're going to have two controllers. One is going to be the user controller, and the other one is going to be the profile controller, although I didn't follow my naming convention. This is the user controller, is going to retrieve data, list the entire list of users, and the profile is going to retrieve only one of these users. Make sense? So how do we do this? So to do this, to share data amongst controllers, the approach okay. This design pattern is somewhat similar to what you might have seen in database courses, where whenever you're going to access a particular entity, right? You tend to what you typically do is that you wrap all data access to that particular entity through a dedicated class, right, or dedicated set of classes. Typically you call them data access objects, DAOs, right? If you have a table and you provide a data access object that implements all the CRUD operations, right, that manipulate that table, right? It does the inserts, the updates, the deletes, right, the selects, and then you provide a nice API. Users, find user by ID, find user by username, find whatever, right? You have a whole bunch of finders, which are implemented using various select statements, yes? And then you have all sorts of CRUD operations that allow you to create, which inserts, or update, which updates, delete, which deletes, yes? But the idea is that you don't want to implement all these queries all over your code, right? Instead, you want to have it in one single modular, reusable piece of code, yes? Same thing here, same idea here, right? In the service, we implement various operations, right? And we create an API, right? We create an API and then return that to whoever wants to use us, right? And down below is the implementation of that API, right? So I might declare several finders, find all users, find user by ID, right? And then implement it down here. Again, these are fairly trivial on purpose. Okay, and also we haven't done any CRUDs, right? We haven't done any creates, updates, deletes, but they would be here, right? This is where they would go, okay? And we would add them to the service map, right? And would retrieve them. And notice that what we've done here, we've put the dummy data, right, the mock data here in the service, right? Which in this case is just an array Now, right now, it lives here in this JavaScript. Right, where it should live, right? Actually, where should it live? It should live in the database, yes? Right, but we don't have a database just yet, so for now it'll live in the server. We'll retrieve it from the server, right? Grab it here, and then make it available to the rest of the controllers, okay? So to create this service and make it available to all controllers, we use the .factory function here, right? Inside of part of the Angular framework. What the factory function does is, this is another design pattern, right? Just like DAOs are a design pattern, right? You know, encapsulate your data access into one particular set of classes, right? The factory design pattern is, you know, for me, because it's way too complicated for me to instantiate. You know, do all the dependencies and tie everything together that you need to do, right? And then just give me an instance, right? I don't want to know about the details, okay? So factory creates an instance for me. And what this does is that takes your constructor, creates an instance, and then it makes it available to the framework by name, right? It makes it available. Anybody who asks for this service by name, right? They will be injected, right, the instance of this service, right? And so that's what the factory function, the magic of the factory function, you know, instantiates it and then it makes it available so they can be injected when you ask for it. Okay, so the controllers ask for it by injection, right? So the user controller asks for the service by name. You see that? Just like you ask for $scope and it gets injected. We have created our own service. $scope is a service, right? Somebody wrote it, right? The Angular team at Google wrote it, right? But we can create our own, right? Using the .factory or the .service function. And once we use the whatever name we use, we can then inject it to whoever needs it. So the controller gets a hold of it. And now you can use it to call those functions to retrieve all users and then make them available to the UI for rendering, right? And the UI just, you know, iterates over them and displays the usernames, right? Everybody okay? Yes?
Does this mean that it passes a reference, or is it a copy of the...
No, a reference. Sorry, there's only one of them. It's a singleton.
So if I make any changes to this, this would be reflected.
Everybody, yes. It's one. Right? Right. We just want one instance of this, you know, throughout our application. It's the same instance everywhere. Okay. The profile controller also uses the user service. It gets the same instance, right? But instead of retrieving all users, it's going to retrieve a user by ID. Okay. It's going to pass. It needs to pass to find by a user by ID. It's going to have to pass it some number. Where does it get that number? Okay, the number that we want, it's the one that follows the slash, right? Right in profile. Okay, in here, right? As we click, we have the ID right here, right at the end of the URL. You see that? We want to be able to grab that, and the way we did that is that in the config. In the config, when we set profile, notice that we created a profile. You see that? And we called it ID. That means that anything after the slash, after profile, gets bound to this variable called ID, and we can then ask for it. We can ask for that value, right? What's the value parsed? The way we ask for it is through another service, part of the routing framework called route params, right? Which is basically a map of anything that was parsed out of the path, okay? And we can retrieve by name. So if we called it ID in the configuration, we can retrieve it by name .id. There it is. See that? And we can copy it locally or pass it to the view. We are using it, right? We are using it, right, as a parameter to the user service to retrieve that one user, right? And then that one user is sent over to the view for rendering. Yes? Make sense? Right. Okay. I think we have everything we need to be dangerous. All right. So let's switch gears and let's start building something. Okay. Let's try and replicate what we did. Was it last week? Oh yeah, last week we created an admin tool for managing movies, right? And the week before we had used jQuery Ajax, right, to be able to go fetch data dynamically from OMDB. So let's try and replicate those things, but now using Angular, AngularJS. We have been playing around with. Okay, let's take a quick break, and then we'll do some coding. All right.
So I had a question. Like, we have this file called config.js. We have declared in that template URL and the controller.
Yeah.
Like in other frameworks, you consider node or whatever, and you have need to redirect the controller, and controller will display the view. Right?
Yes.
So here we are declaring the view and the controller in the
yes.
config.js. Isn't it like, how is it? I'm not like convinced like it's a good thing.
So wait a minute. So what other frameworks?
Like I'm talking about, like for example, Ruby on Rails or something. So you have a routes.rb.
Yeah.
So where you declare the route corresponding to the controller.
Yeah.
So the controller will take care of displaying which view to render.
Okay. So that is not right. Okay. That is this right? Okay, so what you just, someone deciding what to see, right? Yeah. Meaning, if you have this in the URL, right, this is what you should see, right? That is not these controllers here. Okay. Those are not those controllers, right? Okay. What you just mapping of, here's the state of the application. So here's an encoding of the URL, which should map to a unique state of the application, right? So that means that this is what you should see, okay. Right? This right here, right? If you see that in the URL, and this could be fairly complex, right? It could be, could be something like this. It could be several layers deep. Yes. Okay. So this mapping happens between this and this. There's only one of them, though, as opposed to having several controllers and each controller deciding what view you see. Okay. Right? There's only one dispatcher. There's only one dispatcher that everybody uses the same dispatcher and says, oh, this is what the URL looks like, which is a state, right? And there should be only a finite number of states, possible states, right? Valid states. And this is how this is the template that is responsible for rendering that state. Okay, that's about what you just mentioned. Now somebody is responsible for providing the data, right? That view needs, right? Only the data, not what you should see, what view you should see. That's not it. The controller is what that does. The controller only doesn't decide which view you should see. It decides what data should be shown at that view. Okay, and also provides any interaction, right? Any event handlers as the user interacts with the page and clicks and does and whatever in that same page, right? What you should see or not. Now, one of the limitations that we haven't talked about is nested views, right? If you have a view inside of another view inside of another view, right? And what happens? You want to be as granular as possible to be able to say, well, this controller is only responsible for this sub view, and there's a higher level view and a higher level view. That's not supported
So you're saying you can't access the view from the controller itself, like other things. Like can you?
Yeah, you
access
can't.
Okay.
In
Only
the,
pass the data
in the
to-
version, it only passes data for rendering.
So it's not like the controller which we talk about in normal
No,
PVC
no.
framework.
Yeah, and JSP, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
JSPs, ASPs behave the same way. At the end of the semester, we're going to look at EJS. EJS behave that way.
Okay.
EJS behave that way.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Are you going to demo directive and how to interact with jQuery
Yes.
as well?
Yep.
In the demo?
Yes. Yes.
Always do a team project like.
All
mailed
right.
you about the-
Yeah, I
we had.
I think I responded, right? Did I
Yes.
respond? I think I responded.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
it's understood what you're working on and what you're working on.
So like for that only.
Obviously, you can
discuss
overlap
with
and,
you
and
about
collaborate, right? But I want to know that you worked on these features,
Yeah.
right? And this model is yours, and these services are yours, and this is your Angular and your style, blah blah blah. Well, obviously, style could be cross, right? And also you too, right? So that whenever you're going to be graded, right? I know that the amount of work was equitable, right? And because that oftentimes happens, and I don't know who worked on what, and so, right? And want to make sure that each one of you has equitable amount of work.
So like we just got to hear from you that you'll be helping us underwriting the functionalities.
Yes. Yeah.
So, could we come?
Yes, please. Yes.
Friday, is it like okay? Like because you're doing.
Yeah. Well, today, nobody came. Just one person came.
Oh, okay.
Even though I had 4 people scheduled, only one person came.
So it'll come like Friday earliest, and you
Yes.
start getting that.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yes.
You get the profile / colon ID, right?
I'm sorry.
The profile / colon ID.
Yeah.
And get routes to profile /0/1.
Yep.
The numbers come from the of that particular profile.
Yep. Oh yeah. I guess we didn't cover that, right? The yeah. Let me cover that. On where do they come from? Yes. Thank you. All right, let's go. Let's keep going. All right. All right, come on. So yeah, some was asking in the users, right? As we click Alex or Bob or Charlie, notice that the ID is changing right at the end, right? And that as we hover, notice that these IDs are being modified. So if we look at the source code of this, right? You'll notice that the well, obviously ng view is being loaded, so we need the user templates, right? We're using let's see, the template is users.html, so let's load that user.html, users.html. There it is, right? Here's the template. We can look at the source code and how this is being rendered. If you remember, the controller used the user service .find all users, right? That retrieved the entire array of the users, and it was bound through the scope to the users variable. So this users here is in the scope of the controller, right? That's where the scope did. The controller did, right? $scope.users equal, right? User services .find all users. Yes, everybody okay? Right. Now that I have users, what we're going to do is we're going to repeat as many line users, right? And in each line item, we're going to have a hyperlink, right? And in the hyperlink, the label is going to be the user.username. See that? Okay. Whereas the hyperlink is a dynamic URL. See that? The URL will make, we're creating the URL as we go dynamically. But we're going to hard code first #/profile, right? Don't forget that hash in the links. In the configuration, you don't put the hash, right? Because it's already high level, right? Whereas here, you have to explicitly put the hash, right? Say that I am using Angular to go to jump around, and the index, right? The index, that's a variable that is added as you in the ng repeat, right? And you know which one, and we know these are the indices that are also used in the array, right? These are the indices of an array. As we get closer and closer to the database, these won't be IDs anymore. These won't be indices anymore. They will be actual actual IDs, right? IDs of records that live in the database. Yes, right? These are created dynamically by the database, and these will be slash and then whatever that ID is. It will be some long number, right? Hexadecimal number that uniquely identifies that particular record. Yes. So we're going to come back to this and re-implement this so that this says, this might say something like user.id, right? That ID being an attribute of the database. Yes? Make sense? Right now we're just using indices because we know that in the back end, the implementation is just an array. Okay? Okay. All right, so let's implement something here. Let's switch over to this section. Let's go and open section 2. And let's run this. You should create a configuration, a run configuration in your environment that allows you to run it right within the IDE, as opposed to always typing node space server.js, right? And what this allows you to do is step through the Node.js code, even though we don't need to right now because we don't have any Node.js code, right? Nevertheless, it's a good idea to have it ready for next week when we do start playing around with stepping through Node.js code. Right? So declare here, call it whatever. Maybe you can call it the name of the. Oops, sorry. Let me edit that. And say that we're going to run Node in this directory, right? And the JavaScript that we want to run is the server.js file here. So we're going to say OK. So now we can select that server.js and we can run it. And it doesn't like it. OK, it looks like we haven't installed Express. Let's do that. So make sure that we're in the right place. npm install. Oh no, you know what might happen is that I might be running already an instance of Node server. Where might that be running from? Not here. Can I look at the, what's the Mac to run, to see all the processes? Activity monitor, thank you. So let's sort it by name and see if I already have Node.js running here. Anybody see Node somewhere? Wait, let me sort it backwards.
Yes.
Huh, doesn't seem like I have Node. Really? Huh, wait a minute. What's going on here? Did I not stop it when I cannot find Module Express? Oh, section 1. Oops, I'm in the wrong section. Let me edit that again. So, no, it's section 2. Oh, section 2. Oh, I mistyped this. This is section 2. I'm sorry. Let me go back up. Go to section 2. Server. Okay, let me try it again. Okay, it's running, right? And let's navigate there, please. Very distracting, right? So let me go localhost 3000, and we're here. Welcome to section 2. All right. Let's start creating here something in AngularJS. Let's create an experiment for Angular. So Angular. And in Angular, we'll create a couple of experiments. But for now, let's do an OMDB API. And in here, let's create an index. And this index is going to be our wrapper, right? It's going to wrap our entire single page application. Okay. And you say yes. And so here we're going to declare this as an ng app, and we'll call it movie app. Okay. We will load some bootstrap. So let's go fetch a bootstrap CDN. And we'll do style sheet. And we'll load the, let's see, let's load the Angular. So let's go fetch an Angular CDN, AngularJS CDN. We'll use, let's see, Google's implementation, which we can copy from right here, the snippet. Right, and we're going to need the other live. Oh, and that's jQuery. That's not the one I want. Wait, Angular, that one right here. There we go. Let's copy that. There we go. We're going to need also the routing library. All right, so I'm going to paste it again, and I believe what the wait. What do I have two of these? No. I believe the routing is Angular-route, I believe. Okay, let's see if that's the case. So let's create a div that's going to have our container. And movie app. Okay, so let's navigate to this index page to see if this is running. So this is under experiments. Experiments, Angular, and then OMDB API. There we go, a movie app, right? Let's look at the source, inspect it to see if the two libraries are being loaded. Looks like we have an error. Let's look at the network, see if we downloaded everything. So we were able to download Angular min, and the preview, there it is. And the Angular routing, also we were able to load it. So it looks like it loaded it. What's the problem complaining about? Oh, I know. We declare movie app, right? We declare movie app. It's looking for the declaration of the movie app, right? So let's do that. Let's create a script, and we'll say source, right? And in there, we're going to declare our top level module, right? So let's do that. Let's create an app.js in there. And this will be app. And in here, we're going to use our IFI and declare our module. What do we call it? Movie app, right? Movie app. And we'll say that this one depends on the ng-route module, the other library. Yeah, we just downloaded, so it's ng-route. Okay? Semicolon. It's loaded. Okay, we don't have an error. Okay, everybody good? All right, so now let's configure this for navigation. So let's have a couple of pages able to navigate between a home page and maybe a search. Okay, a search page, right? The home page is just to greet you and say welcome. So let's create that. Let's do an HTML page in here. We'll say home.html, and in here to home, right? Actually, let's follow our naming convention, right? So let's refactor this and say that this is home.view.html, and then have something similar for the search page. We'll say search, and then directory, new directory, search. What? Oh, I already have one page in there. It'll be search.html. Again, naming convention should be search.view.html. All right, everybody okay? Right, and this one is just going to say, h2 search. Okay, we're going to be able to navigate between the two. So let's configure that in a configuration JavaScript. We're going to say config.js, and in here, let's declare an IFI where we are going to configure our document, our routing. Right, we're going to say, let's grab our main module called movie app, and then I'm going to config that module with the following configuration function that is implemented here. Right. So in this configuration function, we're going to be passed any providers that we want to configure, right, which are provided by the various modules. Okay. So the one we're going to need is the route provider. It allows us to configure the navigation of the web page, right, of the web pages. So we're going to say route provider to configure that when you see /home, we want to go and display the following page inside of the home directory, inside of home view.html. Yes? And then if instead you see /search, and we should instead show the following file instead, right? It will be search/search.view.html. None of the above, right? We want to configure and say that if it's none of the above, then make believe that they typed home, right? If it's none of the above, then we're going to redirect to /home, as if they would have typed /home. Everybody okay? All right. Okay. So in the index page, we're going to create these links that allow us to navigate from one or the other. Right. So let's do that. Let's create the links here. We'll say that we have href. Allows us to go home, and if we instead click on this link, presumably we want to go to the search page. Okay, very good. All right. In this dynamic ng view, which is empty, right? So this div will be loaded the content either the home page or the search page. Everybody okay? All right. If this works or if it blows up. Okay, so we have the home and it's not loading for some reason. Oh, I know why. We never loaded the config. We wrote the config file, but we never actually loaded it. So let's load it. Okay. And that didn't work either. What are we missing? Config app.js. Route. Config. What's config load? Movie app config wrap provider. It is wrap provider, right? Home. Redirect home. And the index is hash home hash search. ngview app console network config. Config is being loaded, right? Provider. We do it. Oh, that's weird. Why doesn't it let me do app? That's weird. Why can't it let me do put a oh, source? No, I'm sorry. Config is being loaded. There it is. It is being called, right? Yeah, it is there. And the route provider is an object, yes? Yeah, it is an object.
NG app should be an HTML with that.
NG app. I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. Should be in the HTML. Thank you. Yeah, we made the scope of our application just a head, right, as opposed to the entire document. There it is, right? So we click on home, we show home or search. Okay, make sense? Right. So say we want to highlight this, right? Just to show like a tab or something like that, right? We could use a Bootstrap tabs. So let's go grab that. Get Bootstrap. Let's grab a tab from Bootstrap. So we could go to navigation and grab one of these guys, right? So we can copy that and put it somewhere here, right? Let's remove this guy, right? And we're just going to have for now, we're just going to have just two. Right? And this is going to link to home. And this is going to link to search. And let's remove these guys down here. So now it just displays a little bit prettier, right? But we don't have any highlight. Okay? So what we want to do is provide the location provider, right? So that the location service, so that we can access that, right? That in the view. For that, what we could do is nav, right? So we have a nav and provide a controller for this. Controller. This is a navigation nav controller right here, which we can use to provide the location provider, service to the view. Okay. So let's do that. Let's declare a controller. Right. So we're going to put it inside a directory navigation, and in there we'll create a controller for that. Let's say navigation controller, and in here let's declare a controller here. Right. We'll say function. Oops. In here we'll Angular.module, which is what do we call it? Movie app, right? And we're going to declare a controller, call nav controller, implemented here, nav controller in this function here. And here we're going to ask for the scope, and we're going to ask for the location service, right? And we're just going to make the, we're going to send the location service to the view so that it could use it to retrieve the URL and see what should I highlight or not, okay? Right, so we're going to say, hey scope, I'm going to send you the location, and I'm going to bind it to a variable called location, right? So that in the navigation here, I can highlight that, right? We can say location.url, right? Let's view if that works, and that. Oh, we need to load that navigation controller in the index page, right? Always make sure you create a file, JavaScript, load it in the index, right? So let's load that and say script source and then navigation controller. There it is. So if we click on home, it's /home or /search. Yes. So we can write code here to highlight the various tabs, right? We can say li class act. I think it's active, right? Let's see. Yeah, active. There it is, right? So instead of hard coding the coded active class, we can calculate that. We can do that dynamically, right? It could be ng. I want to calculate the class that I want to apply. And I want it to be this literal string active, right? If I don't have it, if I don't put it in quotes, right, it'll think it's a variable, right? It'll try to evaluate that variable and see what the value is. But I don't have an active variable. I'm using a literal string active, and it's active if location URL, right, is equal to /home, right? And close the JSON expression. And I'm going to do the same thing for the search, right? So if it's search. Okay, so there it is. If I click on one or the other, it highlights one or the other, right? I'm not using the JavaScript implementation of show this or show that, right? The ng router is doing that, right? The ng router based on the URL or another content. It's not JavaScript of the tab. Make sense? It's not jQuery doing any of this, right? So anyway, so I don't need the URL. I need the URL. Okay, everybody good? Right? I could move this. We could move this whole thing into an HTML template, and I think that's what I asked you to do in the homework, right? I asked you to move this entire navigation, right? I think it's the header or the sidebar, I don't remember, and ask you to move it into a template and then ng include it here. Okay, I'm not going to do that. You can do that at home. Anyway, so let's navigate to search, and let's actually do the search. Do the search. So let's go into search view. So in the search view, we want to ask for a title of the movie, a button, right, and then go off and fetch this in. But we did it with jQuery. And if you remember with jQuery, it was fairly intensive, right? We were generating the TRs, all the TDs, right, using DOM manipulation. Here is going to be so much easier, okay? Right, because we're not going to do any of that, right? Who's going to do that? The view is going to do that. We're just going to give it a template, right, and an ng repeat to do this. So let's do that, right? So let's create an input here, and this is going to be the I'm going to tie this to a title, or the movie title, which is going to be now available in the controller, right? Which we don't have a controller, but it'll be available in a controller. I'm going to style this a little bit, so this will be a form control, right? So let's load that. And there we have the input field. There it is. And let's add a button down below. One of your students, one of your colleagues is texting me. Let me turn this off. So let's add here a button that if I click on it, I want to search the title. Okay? And this is going to be there's going to be a button, and there's going to be a button primary, and I want to extend the entire width of the page, so it'll be button block, right? And it's going to have the text search. There it is, right? Everybody okay? All right. Okay, so we need a controller to actually do this. Right? So let's do that. Let's write a controller that handles these button clicks, right? And actually does the search at OMDB. When you have this really long line, even in HTML, it makes it easier to read if you split this into separate lines, right? Right. So please make use of white spacing, right? You will be graded on white spacing, right? Make sure you make it as easy as to read for us. Make it as easy as possible for us to give you an A. Okay. Okay. So let's do that. Let's create a controller for this. We'll say that in the config, we're going to say that the search page, right, is going to have a dedicated controller. We're going to call it controller. We'll call it search controller. Search. Can type search controller. Okay, by name, right? So let's implement that in a dedicated file. So here in search, we'll say new JavaScript. And don't let me forget to add that in the index page, right? We'll have a search.controller.js. Okay. So in here, we're going to create an IFI where we're going to implement this controller. And so we're going to get Angular dot module, the movie app, and then we're going to declare a controller called search controller implemented in a function called search controller. Right? There we go. Okay, everybody okay? All right. All right. So how do we do this? So we're going to need the scope to connect the event handler and retrieve the title of the movie. So let's do the scope here. Scope. And we're going to create the event handler up here. We're going to say scope.search. That's what we called it in the UI. And we're going to tie it to a function here, also of the same name, and it's going to receive the title as an argument. Yes? And let's see if that works. So if we refresh and inspect, and we put it maybe to the, see that there's an error here. Oh, the controller, you didn't remind me to put it in index. Let's put the index here. Let's go to an index page, and let's declare that controller. It'll be script, there's our C, search, right? Search controller. Okay, we have the search controller, and if we type something, we search, there it is. So we have it tied, right? Okay, so in there, in the search page, I'm going to hard code one of my favorite movies. Well, I'm going to hard code it here. So the way we hard coded it in a couple of weeks ago is that we used value. Remember that? We hard coded, Star Wars here. right? But if we go and use it, you'll notice that it doesn't actually show, right? And the reason it doesn't show is that this is at the DOM level, right? This is at the DOM. It's way too low level. It's actually bound to something much higher level. See that? So it's being overwritten by whatever the model says, and the model has no value for this variable. It looks for this value of title in the scope. It doesn't find it, so it's undefined. So by default, it's blank. Yes, right. So instead, to override that, we can go to the controller and hard code it here. Although it's not a good idea, but I don't want to have to type the names over and over and over. So I'm going to hard code it here and say star. So now if I reload, oops, wait, if I reload it, now we have Star Wars, right? But because the model says that that's the name of the title. See, right? So okay, so I'm going to remove that from the values. Okay, pretty good. All right. Okay, so let's do the search. Let's actually do the search. Let's. I don't remember what the API looked like. Let's go to the API. And the API, OMDB, was it? OMDB API, was it? And the query was something like that, right? And so the search controller is we can ask for initial service, right, to be able to talk to HTTP resources, right? Just like scope allows us to talk and interact with DOM resources, right, through a model, right? The $HTTP service allows us to talk HTTP. Okay, so DOM allows us, scope allows us to talk to DOM. HTTP allows us to talk to the network. Okay. So what we could do here is do something like $HTTP and generate a GET, right? Create a GET request. Use that URL, okay, and say that we want for the title, we want the title that comes in. Okay, that's the URL we're using. We did this a couple weeks ago using jQuery Ajax, right? This is equivalent, but we're using another API. Okay, but this is a little cleaner, I would say, a little bit higher level, right? So the way in jQuery you would use URL colon and then you would provide the URL, right? Here it's provided as part of the and then it's going to notify us when it's done. Right? It's going to notify us, and the way we tell it how to configure it is that we have a success. We declare a success function, right, and say the function is this. Right? So this is going to be the response, and we're just going to do console.log response. Okay. All right. So let's try that. Let's refresh this. Let's refresh, and the console. Wait, maybe you have to refresh, maybe? Search. There we go. Right, so it actually went out, right? It retrieved the data, and we have it. Right, the same exact thing we did 2 weeks ago using jQuery, but instead of using jQuery, we're using AngularJS. It has its own API. Each library has its own API. All right, but underneath it's the same thing. Okay, so we get the same object we were getting last week, 10 objects that match the title that we are searching for. Okay, everybody good? All right. So what would we do here now with jQuery? We would have to start building the table, right? So we would need, in the HTML, we would need a table to fill, right? So we're going to have here, we're going to say H3 search results, right? And we need a table. There's going to be a table, striped. That's it, right? Maybe put this inside of a table responsive Yes? Right? And inside the table, we might have a T head, and we might have a table row, and a TH, one for the poster, one for the, and what else? And the ID. All right, let's display the ID just so that we know. So the ID, IMDb ID. Okay, right? And then would have a table body. And that's as far as we went with jQuery, if you remember, right? We left the T body empty, and then we generated the content of the table body dynamically from jQuery, right? We generate a new TR, we iterated over the response, right? And we created a table row, and then we append, 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 append. Remember that? It was fairly complex, right? It was, you know, I would say 20, 30 lines of code of generating this dynamic content. We're not going to do that here, right? Actually, JavaScript is done. We don't have to do anything in JavaScript, okay? Well, we do have to do one thing. JavaScript has to provide the data back to the view, right? So here, the only thing that JavaScript needs to do is say scope dot response is equal to response, right? Or we might call it, you know, data. It's going to send you the data, and you view are responsible for rendering it, right? That's all JavaScript. That's it. We're not going to, like last week or a couple weeks ago, we're not going to generate the dynamic HTML by hand. Okay, that's way too low level. It is the responsibility of the view to render that, right? So to do that, we're going to give it a template. We're going to say that for each, we want to repeat for each movie in where? In the search, right? Notice that's the array. You see that? That's the array. Right? It's inside of the response in the search. But we bound it to what? We bound it to data, didn't we? Yeah, data, right? So we're going to say in data search. Yes, for each one of those elements in that array, I want to create a new table data. Right? For the poster, I want to create what? An image, right? Whose source is what? Is the movie dot poster, I believe. Is it? Yeah, poster. Right? And that's it, right? And let's keep going. And there's a little flaw there that we'll fix in a minute, right? It's almost correct. We'll want here the title of the movie, movie.title. Wait, title, is it? Yeah, title, capital T. And we're going to do the IMDb, which is that. Everybody good? All right, so let's try it. Let's go here and let's refresh. Oops. Okay, notice what happens. See that? What's that? We got this exception, right? The exception says, I tried to download, you know, this image, right, from .poster. I couldn't find that image, right? So it's getting me a 404. So what the browser is looking, it's parsing this out. It says, oh, I need to go fetch this image, right? I need to go fetch this image, but this image is weird, you know, curly brackets, something, something or other. It doesn't actually map to any file, right? So it's giving an error, right? So what we need to do is tell the image, we need to tell the image element that, no, I don't have the source yet, right? I don't know what the source is yet. This is only a template that's going to be used later on as I know what the URLs are. Yes? So that's why I said we need to fix this. Instead of src, we're going to use gsrc. And what this says, there is no src. Okay? The src Make sense? Meaning load these later when I know what they are. Okay, so when I refresh, I don't have the error, right? I don't get the error, right? So let's search. There it is. 20 or 30 lines of code in jQuery, right? It's just a few lines of code in HTML. Okay, no JavaScript, no need to do any of that, and it's the same feature set that we had earlier. We still can style this, right? We can say that the height is 100 pixels, right? And we're there. Everybody okay? All right. So what we'd like to be able to do now is that we would like to have notice that we have the IMDb, right? What we'd like to be able to do is to navigate to a details page, right? Where, knowing the ID of the movie, I could go back to the API and says, hey, give me the details for this particular movie, right? So let's do that. We're going to create out of the image, right? Or maybe out of the movie. Let's say out of the movie. If you click on the movie title, right, you go see what the details of the movie is, right? So let's do that, right? We'll say, well, let's create a hyperlink out of this. We'll say that we have a hyperlink A, right? And we want to go to a details page, right? And the going to be hash, right? It's a single page application. I want to make it look like I'm navigating to a page, but I'm never actually leaving this page, right? It's going to either go home, search, or details. So I'm going to go to details, the detail page. I don't like to use plurals. Detail page, and then I'm going to provide as an argument to that details page, I want you to show me the details of this particular movie. So I will pass as an argument the movie.imdb ID. Okay, right? So I'm going to close the hyperlink, and I'm going to wrap the title around this hyperlink. Okay. Again, please make it as easy to read for us. Right? So if I refresh this and I search, notice that these are now hyperlinks, and they're linking right to details/ID. You see that? IMDb. As I hover each one of these, each one has a different ID. Right? If I click on this, I'm not going to go anywhere. Right? Notice that if I click on it, it's going to go home. Why is that? Because it's a redirect. Remember the redirects too? It says I don't know that path, that route. Right, so I'm just going to go home. Configure the details page. All right, let's go back to the config page. Config, and we're going to add a new route. Right, we're going to say when. Let's say if you see detail. Okay, we're going to create a new template for that template. URL that is, we'll call it maybe search, right? And then in here, detail.view.html, okay? And an accompanying controller, right? So you're gonna have a controller that's gonna say detail controller, okay? Right? So let's implement the detail view. In the detail view, let's create a detail view here. We're going to say search, and we'll put HTML, and this will be detail.view.html. And in here, it's a partial, right? So it's going to be h2 details, right? And I'm going to render here just the IMDb that is going to be provided to me as an argument, right? So I'm going to ID. Who provides that? The only one who can provide that is the controller, right? The controller provides me the data, right, in the scope, presumably, right? So somehow the controller is going to have to retrieve it from the URL and provide it to me, right? So from the URL, right? So how do we put it in the URL, right? Well, you'll notice that in the search view, we're putting it as part of detail / and then the IMDb. That means that the route here for the details should have a placeholder to catch that information as part of the URL, right? So I'm going to put a placeholder here, IMDb ID. Yes? So in the controller, in the detail controller, I should be able to grab that from the route params. Remember the route params? So let's do that, right? So let's create a controller here. New JavaScript, and we'll say the detail controller.js. And in here, right, we'll create that controller. We'll say function, and this will be Angular.module movie app, and this will be controller. Oops. Controller, and then a function also called detail controller. We're going to have a function, and here we're going to need the scope, and I'm going to need those parameters, right? Those parameters, and those parameters are going to be in here in route params, right? Route params. So in that ID is going to be in that route the IMDb here, IMDb ID is going to be from the route params. So route params.imdb, IMDb ID. And I'm going to send it to the view. I'm going to send it to the view in the scope. I guess I could have done it here, right? I could have said right here, right? Like that. Careful putting a var here, right? Careful doing that. No var, right? Scope is a variable that has been already declared, right? Don't redeclare it. There we go. So we're sending the ID back to the view. So let's try this. See if it blows up. Ah, it was going to blow up. Thank you. Let's go to the index page. So let's add the controller here. Script, source, search, and then the detail controller. There we go. Okay. Let's load this. Let's go search. Let's search something, and let's click on this, and it goes to detail, and it worked the first time. Awesome. So we have the ID of the movie. We have the ID of the movie. So now we have to go fetch the details, right? So we can go to the controller, the detail controller, and again use HTTP here, right? And it's going to look something similar to what we did in the search control. It's going to look something similar to this, okay? But if you remember, we said that the controller should not directly access data or manipulate data, right? That instead it should go through a service, right? And we broke that here, that design pattern here, right? Here, the controller is directly accessing that data, right? Instead, we should wrap this inside of a movie service or an OMDB API service or something, right? That knows how to query and fetch and do stuff with some data source, right? So that it can be shared across several controllers, right? And so instead of, right, so if I want in some other page also to search for a movie, I would have to copy and paste this code there. Implementation. So instead, before we go further in the detail controller, right, and search for the details, let's move this into a centralized service, okay, a movie on OMDB API service. All right, so let's declare here OMDB API a service. Let's say services. And all our services that either talk to third-party APIs or services that talk to our own server, right, are going to be here. Yes? Right? The ones that talk to our server are going to allow us to create users, log in, register users, search for a user by username and password, all those kinds of things, right? Search for movies that we've liked, movies that we have reviews on, right? That goes to our local database, yes? So you'll have a service or services for those, right? But here we're going to create a service that goes out to a remote data source, yes? So let's create here a new excuse me, a new JavaScript here is going to say we'll call it the OMDB API service. Okay, API dot service dot JS. Okay, all right. Okay, so we have that service, and we're going to create a module, and we're going to create a modularized implementation of that access to the OMDB API. Right. The only two real things that we need is what, find by title, by IMDb ID. Right. Those are the only two that we really need. Right. Oh, excuse me. So we're going to have here Angular with that module movie app, right? And we're going to use a factory to implement the movie service. So movie service will is going to abstract the access to the database to that data source, right? We'll call it movie service, implemented in this function. And here we are going to use HTTP. Here we are going to use HTTP, right? We're going to create a small API, right? And it's going to be a map that says find movie by title. It's going to be implemented by a function down below of the same name. And now we're going to implement find movie by IMDb ID, which is implemented by the same function down below. What do you complain? Oh, equal. Factory. Oh, thank you. Yes, factory. There we go. So, and what we do is we return this API, right? Again, we're using John Papa's style, right? We declare the API nice at the beginning, so it's easy to understand that these are all the interface to this particular service, and the implementation, if we care to read it, it's down below, right? If we care to keep reading. So the implementation here will be function, and then we're going to provide the title here, right, as an argument. And implementation, we already had that in the search control, didn't we? So let's copy that. And we're going to do the HTTP call here. We're going to go to that URL. We're going to go to that URL. And then we have to use the success as the data, right? But this function is using scope. The server doesn't know anything about the scope, right? So instead, what we're going to do is that we're going to pass a callback function. This function, right, is going to be an argument. You're going to pass me as an argument the function that I'm going to call on once this response gets resolved, right? So instead of this being here, I'm just going to say callback. Who should I call? Whoever you told me to call, right? All right? Okay. That's it. That's all the function does, right? And then we need the other one, right? But we don't have an implementation for that just yet. I'm just going to declare it here. Otherwise, it's going to blow up, right? We're going to declare it, and we'll fill it in a minute. Okay. Well, let's go back and make sure that the search still works. Right. So let's go back. Now that we've declared the movie service by name, the controller can then ask for it by name. We're no longer going to use HTTP. That's bad practice. Instead, it's now encapsulated in this high-level service that has a nice API, clean API, right? And so this can now be replaced by my movie service dot find by title, and I'm going to pass as an argument the title and the function. You get the function, right? So this might be a little bit easy to read. Semicolon. Right, so that's the function right there. Function I'm passing as an argument, and then sending the data, the response that comes back that is called by the movie service, and then I'm sending it to the front end. Make sense? Everybody still with me? Right. Let's save that. We need to add the controller to the index. So the index, right, script source services, and then we only just have one service. It's called OMDB service, right? All right, let's see if this works. Let's go back to the search, reload, okay? And let's click on search, and it works. Okay, it worked. Wait a minute, is that true?
Yeah.
Let's refresh the page, make sure. Let's refresh the page and make sure that we have the latest code. Search, okay, yeah, so it does work, right? So we're back to where we were, but now it's a good practice. We're using services instead of these low-level HTTP, right? Now, we could go into a little further, right? Notice that we have this movie service, and the movie service is using using the HTTP right away, right? We could argue that this in between the HTTP and the controller, there should be a model. Okay, there should be right because what HTTP returns is the low-level raw JSON that comes from the third-party API. Yes, it might use naming conventions that we don't like, right? It might have a schema that is fairly, we might not just like the schema at all, right? And we might want to convert that schema, right, into our own, movie schema, right? Maybe a higher level of schema, right? And that we could add an additional layer to this, to this controller service. We might put a model in between that takes the raw JSON that comes from the API, right? Massages it, right? It converts it into our own representation of the JSON, and then the view represents it. Make sense? We're not going to do that, but it's something to consider, right? That we might have a layer of conversion between the raw JSON that comes from the data source and our own interpretation of that data. Make sense? All right, so we were about to implement the details controller, right? We're about to implement the details controller. So instead of going the wrong way of using the HTTP, right? Instead, we're going to use the movie service we just implemented, right? Implemented, and the movie service is going to we need to call it, right, when the controller gets instantiated, right? So we need to say, hey, movie service, I want you to find movies by IMDb. There it is, right? And we're going to pass it the IMDb, right? And we need to pass it a function, right? A function that's going to receive the response. We're going to use that response and send it back to the view, right? Basically, that's all the controller does, right? We say scope dot movie equal response. Okay, movie details equals response. Make sense? So now the view has the movie in its scope to be able to render it. Make sense? Notice that the controller has become very, very simple, right? The only thing that the controller is responsible for, right, is handling event handlers, right? Declaring event handlers from the UI, fetching the data from somewhere, and then providing the data to the UI, right? It has a very limited role, right? Handle the events and the stream of events that the user is generating, converting those into requests for data, manipulation of the data. It's not manipulating the data itself, right? It's not fetching the data itself, right? And then providing the new model for the view to render. See that as a very specific role, right? Just like the service has a very specific role, right? And creating these buckets of concerns, it makes it much more easier to to focus on what is that you want to do. You understand? The theme of what is the purpose of what you're doing here. Okay. Anyway, so the details control. So presumably the find movie by ID, we never implemented in the service, right? We never actually implemented it. We left it blank there. Let's go and implement it. So it's expecting the ID, right? And it's expecting a function call that it's going to call back. Yes. So let's do that. Let's go to the service, the IMDb service, and let's implement this, right? It's expecting the IMDb ID. It's expecting a callback function. Okay. Right. So in here, we're going to use a similar HTTP request, right? But I believe instead of the S, it was the I. Was it correct? I think it was the I, right, for the ID, right? I think it was I, right? Let's quickly go IMDb. Yeah, I, right? I for the IMDb. So we're gonna use the IMDb. Yes, right. So let's check this out. And notice that the controller is sending the response back to the movie. So that means that in the details view, we can render not only the IMDb, we can render the entire movie. All right. So let's try that. Let's go back here. Let's reload this and search for Star Wars. And if we click on episode 4, we get episode 4. Look at that. Right? We have the details for episode 4. If we go back, notice what's going to happen now. I'm going to go back. My search results are gone. What would you have expected? Right? You would have expected that search would have still be there, right? So we'll fix that. We'll fix that in a minute. So if we search again and we go to 5, we'll notice that it is episode 5, right? And obviously here you might go rendering. Let's render a couple of things here just to make sure that indeed we can render these things, right? So let's see the object. So we have the title, right? So we'll, instead of details, right, we might use the movie title as a detail. So movie.title, I think it's called. We have the poster somewhere here. Poster, there it is, right? So we can render here an image. ng source, right, is going to be movie.poster, and I'm going to set its height to be 300 pixels, and I'm going to make it a pull left. Okay, so it's going to go to the left-hand side, and everything else is just going to wrap around that, right? Then we're going to put the plot here. We're going to say a paragraph, and in that paragraph, we're going to render the movie.plot. I think it's called plot. Is it plot?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to say movie.plot, right? And then we're going to have maybe the actors, H3 actors, play an unordered list, right, of actors in a line item. We want to display in here the name of the actor, right? And if you remember, the actors were in an array, weren't they? Actors, there it is. So the array is actors. Actually, it's not an array. It's a string. A string. We can split that on the comma. So we can say, I want to do ng repeat actor name, and an array that contains those So let's how can we create an array? We can take the movie dot actors, that's a string, right? And we can split it around comma. So this makes an array, right? That makes an array of strings, right? And we're iterating over that array of strings, and each string in the array is being bound to actor name. Yes? So we can put here the actor name, like that, right? Okay, let's see if this blows up. Let's refresh that. And okay, so the actors worked, right? The plot seemed to work. The URL didn't seem to work. Let me see. Oh, I think I need to put this in curly brackets. More or less workable, right? We have a start of the beginnings of one of these pages. Everybody okay? Right? Notice that JavaScript didn't do anything. Right? We didn't build the DOM by hand, right? Or iterate or anything, right? It was the view who was responsible. Once you give it the data, right? It is the view's responsibility to create all these templates, right? And render the content. Everybody good? All right. Notice what happened here. I refreshed. I'm refreshing, and it shows exactly the same data, right? That's how we want pages to work, right? I should be able to just click this, copy it, and send it to you. You click on that URL, and you would see exactly the same details page, right? The state of that application, of that page, is uniquely identified and encoded in the URL. The URL uniquely tells you what it is that you should show. Right? I only need that URL to be able to reconstitute this page. Yes? So we want something similar. If I go here, right? We had this Star Wars. Notice that the state here, notice that we have two states actually here, don't we? And there's an ambiguity. Both states are being represented by the same URL. Right? Because this is ambiguity, well, we don't know what to do, right? We basically fall back on the default state, right? There's two states. One of them is you haven't yet searched. Yes? Right? But when we do search, right, this is another state. You see that? Right? But we're using the same URL. Makes no sense, right? We should be able to represent them as unique states. Okay, so what we should do, right? What we should do is represent them as two separate states, right? So we should go into the config. We should go into the config and encode both states separately, right? So how should this be encoded? The search parameter, this should be right here, right? Should be right there. So that if I navigate to this, that parameter should be used to do the search, right? Notice that currently this URL pattern does not exist, right? So if I do this, it doesn't understand it, and it just goes to the default home. Yes? So let's encode that. Let's encode it. And let's declare here another one of these, and we'll say that we'll create the title here. You see that? Right? So now what we're saying is that for either one, we want to use exactly the same template and the same controller. But the controller now needs to be able to understand both states, right? It's not going to do anything. But if it does have a title, then it's going to do the search immediately. Right? It's going to go fetch the data. Okay. Right. So let's go here. Right. So let's go to the controller, the search controller. Right. In the search controller, this is going to be a little more sophisticated. Right. Right. We're going to try and get the parameter of the title from the URL using route params. Right. Route params. Right. And the title is going to be from the route params. You say route params.title. Right? And we're going to have an if statement that says, if the title is null, if no title, then the title is Star Wars, right? So if there isn't, then this is what's gonna, it's what going to be, right? Actually, no. I'm only using Star Wars here because I don't want to type, basically, right? It's not that I wanted to search for Star Wars by default, right? So yeah, so not really. Right? So let's comment that out. Let's do a realistic. So I'm going to fetch the title, right? And what we're going to do, right, is that what we're going to do is going to say, you know, if we have a title, then we're going to do the search. Right? We're going to call search, right, with the title. And that's going to do the search. All right, so let's try it out. Now let's refresh. Go to search and actually type Star Wars. Okay. We'll do the search and it renders it. Let's see if that works here as well, right? Star Trek instead. Notice that it works, right? The URL works and the controller works. It grabs it, right? But and notice that if I go and look and go to the details, right? If I click on the details, I go to see that, and when I come back, notice that I still have. Notice that it remembers, right? The history. That's one of the beauty about using the hash. The hash, right? The URLs that you use in the hash are added to the history of the URLs, right? So that the back buttons work just the same as you would expect, right? You know, as you click and the hash changes, and you go back, it remembers all the hashes, right, that were added to the URL, right? So that works beautifully. So notice that the forward also works fine, right? The forward, I go forward, right? It remembers the ID, right? So this behaves like you would expect, right? There's one flaw though, right? If we go to home and we're back to search, and we search for Star Trek, do the search, notice that the URL, right? See the URL? Is still search, right? It should reflect the fact that we have searched for Star Trek, right? And that should be part of the URL, right? So what we're going to do here is that instead of actually coding this search here, what we're going to do is to physically navigate, right, to search / the title, and then let the controller, right, handle that, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do the search. We're going to add that in the URL, the title in the URL. For that, we're going to need location, because location allows you to read the URL and allows you to write to the URL, right? So to do that, we can say location, right? We're not gonna read the URL. This allows you to read the URL. We're gonna change it. I'm gonna say that the URL is search followed by the title. Okay. So let's refresh this. And if we type avatar, it didn't work. Do you refresh? It didn't. Avatar. Okay, wait, I got an error. Console, blah, 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 the server responded. Failed to load resource, the server responded. 1DB, blah, blah, blah. Angular, 1DB. Oh, maybe it's not URL. There's another one. URL path, is it? Let me look at the location. So URL path maybe? URL. Or apps URL? No, that's not it. URL, protocol, host, port. I'm sorry? Oh, is it path? Return the path, then call without parameters, change the path when calling, blah, blah, blah. Foo path, some path, blah, blah, blah. Oh, maybe it's path then. AngularJS set URL. Path. Oh, it goes back to here. Maybe it's path. Let me try path then. Path. Not path. I did refresh, right? Source, so that's not it. Let's see, console. It's the config, search, path. So is it not path? Let's see. Oops, what happened? Sorry? Oh, okay, wait a minute. So it's not even coming here. Scope. Oh wait, where's the event handler? Oh, it should be in the search. Ugh. Right, it should be in the search, right? In the search. When we do the search, we set the path, right? Let me try URL again. What was URL? Avatar. Yeah, there it is. There it is, avatar. See? I was putting it in the wrong place. There we go. Right. So now it's properly. Now it's proper. The state of this page, right, is uniquely identified by the URL, so that I can now go to the details, right, and I can come back with the avatar. See that? Now the forward and backwards, and please, right, for your project, right, make sure that the forwards and the backwards buttons behave the way you would expect them to behave, right? That, when you go back, right, the state of the application is maintained, right? That you would expect that everything that you go back, re-renders, right, what you used to have in the previous page. Okay. All right. Any questions? Every still with me? All right. Do we have time to go into directives? 5 minutes? Or is everybody burnt out and prefers to do directives maybe next week? Right. All right. We'll talk about directives next week. Please take a look at the directives examples here. Play around with them, and look at the source code so that it can we can go through that really quick. The examples, you'll notice that you can collapse the source code. You can expand it so you can view it directly. This view here, this button, just a second, please. This button right here of viewing the source code like that only works on Chrome. Okay, only works on Chrome. Well, actually, no, it doesn't. Wait, for this. Oh no, it might work on Safari as well. Anyway, so take a look at this. Please go over the directives, and we can play around with it when we come back on Wednesday. Thank you.